Real-world evaluation, working under budget, time, data, and political constraints by Vicki Eber, Sarah Kloster, and Melissa Demchevska. This chapter covers 5 different strategies for navigating an evaluation with budget constraints. These include simplifying the design, clarifying client needs, using secondary data, reduce sample size, and reduce data collection costs. A tight budget and the need to refine methods of evaluation also calls for careful consideration to the validity and adequacy of the evaluation conclusions. In order to address budget constraints, there are 5 key questions to consider, while also factoring in validity of the design. In order to simplify a design, it is important to look at what is the most cost-effective evaluation design, while maintaining validity in constructs, design, statistical conclusion, and the ability to generalize to other populations. Simplifying the evaluation design can result in potential cost savings from 10 up to 80%, depending on the design. For quantitative evaluations, some designs allow for an elimination of baseline and comparison groups, while others simply start later, resulting in both time and financial savings. On the qualitative evaluation end, priority lies in focusing on the most critical issues, decreasing the amount of time spent observing or visiting a site, and decreasing the number of people or groups being studied. All of these also reduce the cost of data collection and hours to paying for collecting that data. Longitudinal randomized designs with project comparison groups are statistically strong but expensive. While post-test only project groups might save more, they are considered weaker in design, which could impact the validity of the evaluation as an end result. These are examples of simplified quantitative evaluations that result in potential cost savings. Real-world evaluation approaches are used when the evaluator needs to consider budget, time, data, and political constraints when designing and implementing the evaluation. This requires compromise on the stronger design elements, as they tend to cost more. With compromise, validity needs to be taken into consideration for the evaluation conclusions when weaker designs are implemented. A robust study design must be properly designed, implemented, and analyzed in order to remain methodologically sound. Weaker designs involve either the elimination of baseline data or delay the collection of baseline until the program has been in the implementation stage for some time. If weaker designs must be used, it is strongly encouraged to work into the budget for additional, cost-effective time and resources to create a stronger design. Some qualitative methods are more precise in their implementation. However, there can be more flexible approaches in how these methods are applied. Qualitative methods allow more modification opportunities, such as limiting the amount of time the researcher spends with the study group in observation and having participants report to the researcher at designated timeframes. This can pose some concerns for validity, but just as it applies in quantitative evaluations, it would be encouraged to refine the budget enough to allow for time and resources to be utilized to ensure the design is methodologically sound. Clarifying client needs focuses in on the top priorities and eliminates the collection of unnecessary data. By gaining a clear definition of what information is needed by the client and what types of decisions the evaluation will contribute to, the researcher will save both time and cost in data collection. This eliminates the fluff or unnecessary data, where time and money can be put to better use. Theory models help with the clarification process in order to define the outputs, outcomes, and impacts of the program and the clients the program is meant to serve. Existing data helps offset costs as it reduces the need to gather new primary data. These come in the form of records, census or surveys, school or health records, print or digital media, and dissertations. Secondary data is an easy way to save time and money. However, it is important to identify and evaluate the validity of the secondary data prior to using it for research purposes. The following are examples of existing data that can be used to reduce the need to collect primary data or to supplement primary data that may still need to be gathered. Smaller sample sizes reduce the level of required precision and types of subpopulations required. Cluster samples decrease travel costs, and stratified samples cut the number of interviews needing to be conducted, which can add up in cost. Reduction in sample size requires the evaluator to understand client needs and how research findings are to be used, which can direct attention to the level of precision that is actually based on the former information. It is important for the evaluator to know the requirements of the study, whether statistical precision of a quantitative method is needed or if a more investigative, qualitative method would be best suited based on the needs of the client, while also factoring in time and cost. As seen here, there are methods to reducing time and cost to both the research team and the clients, while also maintaining validity and strong methodology. Economical data collection methods can be through reduction of length and complexity of the instruments that collect the data. Non-essential information, as mentioned in clarifying client needs, can result in a significant reduction in time spent gathering data. The ways to reduce the amount of information can be collected are: 1. Reduce the range of topics to those of top priority. 2. Reduce the number of interviewees. 3. Reduce the number and types of documents to be analyzed. And finally, 4. Shorten the time period studied. Reducing cost and data collection for both qual and quantitative evaluations. 1. Collect information on areas such as community attitudes, time use, access to and use of services through participatory rule appraisal, or PRA group interviews, and focus groups. Individual interviews and surveys can cost more to collect the data needed. 2. Direct observation in place of surveys to collect data on use, travel patterns, and time use. 3. Key informants can help to gather information on community behaviors and use of specific services. 4. Self-administered instruments such as surveys, self-evaluations, response forms, and journals for proper logs of information on income and expenses, travel, and time. 5. Maximize the use of pre-existing data. And 6. Photography and videography as a mode of documentary evidence in the change of quality of living environments. Internal design validity. Budget pressures often will reduce the richness of the data collected. Triangulation is reduced due to budget because applying different data collection methods typically cost more. The most difficult to reach groups are frequently cut due to cost. Both budget and time can also lead to less robust designs. Statistical conclusion validity. The sample size is impacted by budget, which can be reduced to below the minimum size requirement to satisfy power analysis. The higher the required power, a larger sample size is also required. Construct validity. The number of data collection methods or number of independent indicators of key variables are limited with budget constraints. Pre-testing in a local context allows the instruments to be customized to the demographic studied. Use of constructs tested in other regions can result in inadequacies for testing and customizing instruments. External validity is a simplification of sample design can reduce representativity. Chapter 5. When budget is a factor, data collection is a big source of where the budget needs to be adjusted. This can cause constraints in accessing appropriate data sources, which sometimes can be misleading or biased in content. This chapter addresses these concerns. These are the different ways to address the data constraints. Data can be reconstructed when time and budget constraints are a factor. Baseline data can be gathered after the program has begun. Implementation based on gathering the most useful data that was collected prior to the start of the program. Estimations can be made with certain program types after they have begun, based on intake and application forms or the use of administrative reports and records to make an estimation for baseline. The evaluation team should never assume that a baseline study will be conducted just because there is a project document saying it will happen. The baseline data not being generated can be from lack of interest or understanding from program management, political pressures, difficulties setting up the finances, or setting up new data analysis or collection software, to name a few. When selecting comparison groups, self-selection and administrative selection are the most common. When comparing the groups, you can use statistical matching or judgmental matching. Statistical matching involves finding the commonalities between the comparison groups from common background variables, where judgmental matching involves the pooling of all available sources of information to select a group of individuals, communities, or organizations. It is rare for all factors to be equal between any two groups, so it is important not to assume that a control group is matched with the program participant group. Aside from the fact that both groups are participating in the program, contextual factors, among others, need to be taken into consideration when analyzing the program outcomes and impacts in order to determine whether the program interventions did, in fact, have an influence on either or both groups' outcomes, compared to internal and external factors within both control and treatment groups. When addressing sensitive topics, it is important to reach as many people as possible who form part of the social network being studied. Sensitive topics need to be recognized and culturally sensitive approaches need to be developed. Sometimes it is best to use observation so the data collected is not in a staged environment but rather occurs naturally. Sensitive topics such as abuse or contraceptive use and difficult-to-reach groups such as sex workers or drug dealers and users require specific qualitative methods of data collection while maintaining sensitivity to the subject matter. Time and budget constraints can also cause pressure to ignore or put off studying these topics and groups, which could ultimately provide helpful information for future interventions. Observation, key informants, and focus groups are the most used for sensitive topics and difficult-to-reach groups. Tracer studies and snowball samples are examples of methods of data collection for difficult-to-reach groups, where outside sources, such as neighbors, friends, or coworkers, help to locate people who may have moved or sampling a small cluster of members of the difficult-to-reach group to better understand the best methods of approaching others in the larger group sample. Participant observation is to become familiar with and accepted into the groups in question. Initial contact is usually by friends, family, or clients. Tracer studies, use of others to help locate people who have moved. This can be used to trace origins of a certain population. Snowball samples. Members of the difficult-to-reach group are asked to share information on other members. In sociometric techniques, the participants are asked to share who they go to for advice. Sometimes a sociometric map is drawn up to show the connections. This concludes our teaching. Thank you.